Let's talk about the last year of you being Attorney General here in Virginia. One of your biggest initiatives, it seems like, has been the fight with the opioid epidemic. Yeah. Why did you feel like that needed to be a focal point for your first year in your administration?
It has devastated so much of Virginia. And to kind of rewind, what happened is you had a good number of these extremely large pharmaceutical companies that treated Virginia like it was a chemistry experiment. They came into medical providers and said, you could tell your patients to take OxyContin. Don't worry, it's not addictive, knowing that it was some of the most addictive chemicals known to man. So many Virginians, very innocently, started on OxyContin, they got addicted, and then they graduated to heroin, and now we're seeing fentanyl.
Virginia more than other states.
Well, Virginia was the test bed, literally. Southwest Virginia was the test bed for some of these huge pharmaceutical companies, and then it spread from there and become this national epidemic. We lose 108,000 Americans to overdoses in the last 12 months. So that's the equivalent of 2 Vietnam Wars. We lost 50,000 to Vietnam over the course of 15 years. We lost 108,000 Americans to overdose in just the last 12 months. And daily in Virginia, we're losing 4 to 7. And it is catching so many families. There are so many empty chairs at Thanksgivings, at birthdays, and sometimes it is individuals that never intend to get into the cycle of addiction. So we thought we needed 2 parallel tracks. One, the drug dealers, the ones selling fentanyl and this poison to our kids, we want to increase penalties and go after them and prosecute them. But for those in the cycle of addiction, we want them to live their best life. We want them to recover. And so we got some of the largest settlements in Virginia history against these huge pharmaceutical companies for what they did. But that's not money going to my office. That money is going to be going back to Virginians. We worked with the General Assembly and the governor to set up the Opioid Abatement Authority. And so it is a record amount of money going to localities to help people with treatment so they can live their best life, they can get out of the cycle of addiction. And we have this misnomer that asking for help is a sign of weakness. It's not. Asking for help is one of the bravest, strongest things you could ever do. And so what we are trying to tell people is preventatively, 1 pill can kill. Don't go in that cycle of addiction. But if you are, there's money and there's resources for you. A record amount of money going to localities. And so we're proud of the work we're doing, but we have a lot more work to do.
So of course I've seen the PSAs, the 1 pill can kill.
Yeah.
And as a child of the 80s, I remember Nancy Reagan and her don't do drugs. So what do you think you're doing to go beyond a step of that PSA?
Well, a lot of it is just the treatment, that the money that we're getting is going to be doing a lot of inpatient, outpatient treatment. The problem with opioid addiction, what makes it particularly hideous, is it can literally rewire your brain. And so it is a particularly difficult addiction to break. And then you layer on top of that, what we have is the fentanyl crisis, where enough fentanyl is crossing into this country from our southern border to kill every American, man, woman, and child twice over. And so it is particularly insidious. But we want to warn people, because what's happening, what we're seeing in our schools, we had a 15 and a 14-year-old overdose in Prince William County because they thought they were taking a Percocet. It wasn't. It was fentanyl or Xanax. These dealers are lacing narcotics or fake pills with fentanyl because it's so cheap, they can mass produce it. And in some cases, the heroin dealers purposely kill their customers as a marketing tool, because if you're in the cycle of addiction, you hear an overdose, you think, oh, you have the pure heroin, I'm going to go to you. What they're not realizing is that dealer is purposely killing some of his customers to attract new ones. That's how hideous the cycle of addiction is. So this is all about both going after the dealers and treating those with compassion that are in the cycle of addiction, because we want you to get back on your feet and live your best life and live in this amazing country and pursue your dreams.
Now, this session, lawmakers passed laws to make organized retail theft a felony here in Virginia. How big of a problem is that?
It's huge. It's over $1 billion of losses.
In Virginia?
In Virginia. And those are losses paid for by you and me. But what is happening is the law breaking are not worried, but the law abiding are paying the price. Because what happens is these costs get passed on to consumers. And we know that 2/3 of all new jobs are created by these small business owners. So this has been particularly devastating for small business owners. They're the first to get there in the morning, they're the last to leave at night, and they're having trouble keeping open their doors because of the increase of organized retail crime. And so the idea is, if you're part of a larger scheme, if you've stolen over $5,000 of goods over the course of 90 days, then it's a way to give law enforcement additional tools to go after and get these people to stop. And I think it's an important tool. It's something we've seen a lot of other states do, Florida and others, and I think it's an important tool for the toolbox for law enforcement.
One thing legislators didn't pass this year with something to give us some guidance on marijuana sales here in Virginia.
Wow.
Because it is legal, and the only way to get it is illegally. So what do you think we need to do moving forward?
Well, we set up a system in Virginia, tragically, this was under the Northam administration, is we basically said it's legal to possess, but it's illegal to sell, so you don't have a marketplace. And so this has been great for street dealers. And it has been implemented in a way that's, I don't think is long-term, it's tenable. The General Assembly is going to have to make that determination. And what I always tell people is, I'm in a different role. I served in the House of Delegates, but now as Attorney General, my job is to enforce the laws. And every day, candidly, I even go to court to defend laws I didn't even vote for. But that's the role. It's the General Assembly's judgment. But I would say this, the main problem we're seeing right now with this are these THC edibles. They are oftentimes either fake goldfish. They'll have a package that if I was to pick it up, you would just think it's Chips Ahoy. It's actually Trips Ahoy is what they call it. Same logo, same marketing. They're obviously illegal. They break a variety of different trademark laws. But what we've seen with young people is a huge, I think it's a 200% increase with the poison control for young people that are taking THC. And we have put a cap on what the THC level is, because some of what's happening we're seeing on the streets is we have products we've seen where 20, 30 years ago, the THC level may be 5 to 10%. You have some, these are illegal, that are 60, 70%. And so it is incredibly more potent. But you have things like THC gummies, children that don't understand. You had a poison control case of a child at daycare who just thought they had left out THC-laced goldfish, and they had laced it, had to go to poison control. So it's a huge problem. That's where our Consumer Protection Division has come in, because if you're marketing products that are purposefully aimed at kids, then our job is to take you to court if need be to get you to stop doing it. But it is a huge problem. The General Assembly is in the process of working this out. I think they will get there. My job is to enforce the laws that are currently on the books. And right now, if you're marketing THC or THC edibles specifically to kids, or you're violating these copyright laws, our Consumer Protection Division is going to get involved.
Something that we're watching in our community unfold right now is gun violence. I mean, Lynchburg has been a very quiet community for a really long time. Roanoke has a huge problem. Danville working through its own problems. So we have a pretty big region that we cover, and gun violence is the underlying issue that is a safety concern in our community. So what is your office doing to address that?
Well, I'd love to look at data on what are the best methods that have been used in the past to lower gun violence. And what we have seen is the single best method to lower gun violence is to prosecute and go after repeat violent offenders. So what has happened in Virginia is you have certain hot spots of high levels of gun violence. And the idea that the governor and we have put together is, let's put enormous resources to tackle those hot spots. Project Ceasefire. And so we are taking assistant attorney generals out of my office. We're designating them with the U.S. Attorney's Office to take them to federal court, because candidly, some of the penalties are more enhanced. So if you're going down and you are using a gun in commission of a felony, we're going to prosecute you. We're going to prosecute you in federal court. And that has been shown in the past to be the single proven way to lower gun violence. But on the other hand, we have part of Project Ceasefire is preventive, because the two of the most effective ways to make sure that young people don't go into gang activity are after-school activities and sports and churches. What was closed for 12 to 18 months during COVID? Schools and churches. And so the gangs weren't closed. As one special agent told me, this was a great, our reaction to COVID was a great tool for recruitment of young members in gang activities. So we want to get the messaging with our Virginia Rules program and a lot of others on gang preventive, of getting into schools and talking and giving teachers and administrators the tools of knowing this is the wrong pathway. Do not go down this cul-de-sac, because it's going to crush your dreams. So our first step is make sure the young people aren't going down that dark path. But the second step is, if you do go and you start committing violent crimes, to make sure they're prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
I think it would be tough to reach out to those young people, though. Sunshine and lollipops, don't join a gang,
You know what? But you know what they overwhelmingly want to feel? They want to feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And so if you talk to those that are now, a lot of individuals that I've talked to that were former gang members, now they're administrators, now they're trying to talk to them, and you ask them, what made me go down this path? It is a sense of belonging. And so a lot of what we want to do is give different avenues so people don't go down that path, because ultimately it's going to lead to a dead end.
Speaking of penalties, you and I have talked a bit about the budget amendment that kept some of the inmates, thousands of inmates in jail, who were about to be released. We're talking over almost a year ago, for earned sentence credits. You have maintained that that was a public safety issue. Mm-hmm. Still maintain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we had was a situation where over 600 of the most violent offenders were about to be released early. I call it backdoor parole. And before we had parole, a violent criminal would serve on average maybe a third of their sentence, a third or a fourth. So if somebody was sentenced for 10 years for a violent crime, they would get out after 3 or 4, and that was led to a crime explosion. And we reached a consensus in Virginia that we were going to abolish parole. If you do the crime, you're going to do the time, and you have to serve the vast majority of your sentence. This was a backdoor way, in my opinion, of allowing people to be released early. And so we had the budget amendment. We had some bipartisan support that said, okay, we realize that we passed this earned sentence credit, but the reality is 600 of the most violent offenders, we have this budget language that's going to make sure that they are serving their time. And I think the governor made the right call on that.
Do you think that maybe some of those offenders should have been looked at a case-by-case basis, like how many years they had served up to that point, what they had been doing in jail, what the relationship was with jail staff at all? Like, is there a gray area that wasn't examined?
I think what is critically important is you don't forget the victims in this discussion. And that's something, those are the ones that are left on the side of the road. So when I was a prosecutor, I'd ask somebody to relive the single worst moment of their life on a witness stand, in a room full of strangers, under the humiliation of a cross-examination by a defense attorney. Part of that bargain is if you do this, this person will serve their sentence. The idea that that's been taken away from the victims, which that's part of their healing process. Part of their healing process is going through this traumatic event and reliving it again. But part of the healing process is knowing this person can't be released. And we just saw with what happened with the parole board, that time and time again, mistakes were made. Time and time again, victims weren't consulted. So I think it's important that we have uniformity, and I view this as a way of making sure everybody's treated the same.
Let's talk about the parole board.
Okay.
We sat down a little over a year ago to talk about the task force that was going to investigate everything, and right before Christmas, that investigation was released. Were you surprised by the findings?
Well, when I campaigned, I said that Virginians had a lot of questions, and I was going to get answers, and the parole board was one of those. And the governor signed an executive order tasking us to get to the bottom of it. And candidly, it was one of the greatest abuses of power that I have seen in state government, at least in my lifetime. We know that they had the case of Vincent Martin. Vincent Martin was an unrepentant cop killer, gunned down a young police officer in cold blood. He was given life without the possibility of parole. He was released, and the family of that young officer wasn't even notified. And so there was a lot of questions we had, both in the media and myself, and the governor tasked us to get to the truth. And what we got to the bottom of was even worse than I had thought. 134 convicted felons were released early. Out of those 134, 130 were deemed violent offenders. The average sentence of who was released early back into our communities was life plus 28 years. So these are capital murderers, first and second degree murderers, and rapists. And we saw with our horror that then the victims weren't consulted. We saw 83 times that the victims weren't consulted prior to the person being released. We saw 66 times the local Commonwealth attorney, the local prosecutor, who's supposed to be notified according to our victims' rights statute, wasn't notified. We saw 8 different times where somebody was released even in violation of a court order signed by a circuit court judge. We saw 3 times where the parole supervisor had indicated this person should not be released, and they actually altered the public record to indicate the person should be released, which, by the way, is punishable up to 12 months in jail. And then what's most tragic is these people were released and then they committed more crime. You had somebody like David Simpkins, who had 42 prior felony convictions, 42. He gets out and not even a year commits 15 new felonies. You had another individual within 44 days of being released was picked up on an abduction and malicious wounding charge on an innocent woman. And so time and time again, victims were ignored. Time and time again, the prosecutors were ignored or marginalized. And it was simply astounding to me that we got to this point when I said it was a criminal first, victim last mindset. That parole board report that we issued was Exhibit A of a criminal first, victim last mindset. And the victims have felt so betrayed. When you talk to the victims, they have felt so betrayed that they were never consulted. And I've always said I've been going to be a voice for the victims. So I'm proud of the work that our team did. Thankful for the governor for giving us unfettered access to the Department of Corrections and the Parole Board. But you even had a former member of the Parole Board staff say the previous Parole Board chair had said specifically, don't contact rape victims that their rapist is about to release. Why? Because it might be too traumatic. Never thinking that it would be infinitely more traumatic to find out through secondhand sources that the rapist has been released, or God forbid they run into this person in some public space. And so we are proud of the work we've done. We're proud of the work we've had being a voice for the victims. Ultimately, the decision for what happens in Judge Bennett's future is going to be now in the hands of the General Assembly. But we said we're going to get some answers. We got those answers, and I encourage every Virginian to read the Parole Board report that we released.
Yeah, I mean,
one more question.
Okay. We have
Sorry
the
for the long
report.
answer,
That's okay.
sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's talk about the Election Integrity Unit. You launched that September, and ever since then, the NAACP has cried foul and said this isn't needed. They FOIA'd documents and said this unit does not need to exist. It's just there to feed conspiracy theories. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the NAACP has vindicated us because they FOIA'd. They claimed that somehow I was setting up a unit to intimidate voters. That was a flat-out untruth. And they FOIA'd thousands of pages of documents, and they confirmed, indeed, there is absolutely zero evidence. I've had an election law section in the AG's office for decades, and that's by statute my requirement. By law, I have to advise every single local registrar. I have to advise the State Board of Elections, and we are tasked, it's one of the actual areas of original jurisdiction that we have to prosecute crimes, any violation of election law. And so I think it should just be easy to vote, hard to cheat. I think the right to vote is one of the most precious rights. I have one of my most vivid memories was my mother taking me with her when I was just 8 years old, that she got to finally get a chance to vote. She had fled a country, Cuba, with no democracy, with no voice. She finally became a U.S. citizen, and she finally had that chance to vote. And she was so proud that she could have a voice and who the future leader of her country would be, that she took me with her for her to cast her very first ballot. I think it's one of the most precious God-given rights. Our election integrity unit is to defend that right, defend your ability to vote, to be part of this democracy. And so,
so what is it doing?
It's what it's always done. It's both advising our state agencies of what the law is, making sure our registrars have uniformity, and then, if you haven't been aware, we indicted the former registrar in Prince William County as well. And so that's an ongoing trial. I can't comment on an ongoing case, but we want people to follow what our election laws are. And want to know everybody knows have an even playing field, and I will always, always protect anybody's right to vote. And if anybody thinks that any entity is denying them that right or intimidating them right, we had a cease and desist letter we sent to a company that was sending text messages to voters giving them the wrong location to go vote. So we immediately send them a cease and desist letter to stop that action. So those are the type of things that we do. So when I say the AG's office or the people's protector, that means we're going to protect your right to vote. We're going to protect you against major crime. We're going to protect the environment. We're going to protect your civil rights. And I'm proud of what we've done in our first year to do that.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much. God bless.